to everyone. Today we're going to be presenting work that we've been doing between two countries, Canada and South Africa, and talking about learning from one another to understand traditional medicine approaches and plant biochemical efficacy. And this is a collaboration between the Secwepemc people in the British Columbia, Fraser University, the Wistar Institute, and South African Indigenous people at KwaZulu Natal University. So on behalf of our team, we'd like to thank both societies for the opportunity to share our work. Use these areas. All right, so here you see a map on the left of South Africa, of Canada, and on the right you see a blown up a map of British Columbia. And we join today in acknowledging the traditional territories of the Muskogee and Creek people, where Emory, Oxford, and Atlanta campuses are now located. The two of us reside in British Columbia, and British Columbia really constitutes an artificial political boundary that includes the unceded and stolen lands of 203 First Nations peoples, some of whose lands extend beyond the formal demarcation of British Columbia. The 2016 census recorded approximately 200,000 Indigenous people in British Columbia out of a total population of 4.6 million. And the rich diversity of these First Nations people is demonstrated in the 34 Indigenous languages of these nations that include more than 60 dialects.
This slide shows a small number of the Secwepemc elders that have taught us. It is also significant that many of these elders have left us by then. By them being willing to share their knowledge, they have left present generations a great legacy. The information of that which they all carry has not been documented. Otherwise, our language was never written. And so it was passed down orally. And so when we lose an elder, we lose a lot. We lose a lot.
So here we see KwaZulu Natal, South Africa, and there's a South African map that Sizwe showed a more beautiful map earlier. On the eastern part of the country is KwaZulu Natal. And the map shows the International Wealth Index poverty scores in the 11 districts of KwaZulu Natal, as well as the per capita community health worker distribution in each district. And the high intensity color shows the areas that are most poor. And you can see the area that is circled Gqaleni, which is Durban, is the urban area of KwaZulu Natal. And that's where the most wealthy people are situated. So in 2018, 2019, the authors of this paper began collaborations across Indigenous nations, that's the Secwepemc peoples and KwaZulu people in KwaZulu Natal and the countries of Canada and South Africa, to explore how we can support and inspire each other in research approaches and experiences, to develop novel approaches that combine dialogues and interconnections between Indigenous understandings and applications of medicines on the one hand, and Western biochemical and pharmacological approaches to understanding these medicines. And in this presentation, we reflect on knowledge sharing dialogues between the Secwepemc and KwaZulu practitioners and scientists, in which practitioners from Canada and South Africa compared notes during visits to KwaZulu Natal and British Columbia on similarities and differences in approaches, on environmental, social, cultural, and economic challenges to doing healing work, and on the ways traditional healers in Canada and South Africa have recognition or not in healthcare professions. And we also describe briefly a screens to nature approach during which the Secwepemc visit of studying efficacies such as antioxidant and antibacterial properties of indigenous medicines were attended by healers from both settings.
Indigenous initiated dialogue. While collaborations between academic researchers and Indigenous knowledge keepers have increased and evolved from Indigenous healers being subjects of research, this dialogue originated from and at its core involved building bridges, comparing knowledges, and seeking mutual understandings among Indigenous healers themselves. Mama Rosa and I had the belief that plants follow sickness and that the newer diseases, medicines are treated, etc., would be found in both countries' backyard, and the opportunity to share and discuss these ideas were made possible by this collaboration. It was by this invitation of this elder that we traveled to Africa. Otherwise, we never would have went. It would be considered rude protocol. Similar cultural ceremonial practices. There was a lot of similarities between the African group that we met and ourselves. A lot of them being the power of elements, the energy, sacred lodges for doctoring and sharing knowledge, stories, songs. We also believed that there was an energy in the plants and that certain, we'll just leave it at that.
Yep. So, you know, as an observer and as a non-Indigenous person, just watching Indigenous peoples from these two settings speaking to one another and sharing these similarities, it was really quite amazing. And one of the things that perhaps, Rhona, you talk about is the use of sage.
So we both use the smudging, which is most people commonly known as sage and smoke medicine. But what you might not know about it is that it's an emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual way of cleansing in all areas. That not only does it cleanse the air of sicknesses and germs, but it also clears our own emotional of any energies that we may have picked up down the road or throughout. And so our beliefs in that, bringing in that spirit energy and our helpers, we both used the smudge, which was pretty interesting, I guess. Our beliefs are also the same. And again, this, that spirit, that energy of the land. So when you damage the land, you damage the people who, if you take it away, it's your ancestors. They're buried in the ground. They grow in the food you eat. You eat the food. When you pass on, you're back in the ground. It rotates. So it's like transformation over and over and over again. There is no death, but transformation. And when we take our plants, they're considered our ancestors. And when we eat them, you know, that imprints back into our cell memory over and over and over again. So that's the point I'm making there. Our, do we read this too? From Nceba? This is Nceba. We have both been colonized, includes appropriation, expropriation of Indigenous healing and regalia and implements referred to the picture. You always have something to feel guilty about. And this is Puma. You always feel that because of colonialism, your culture and your belief is not sufficient. And the main thing that there is in the confusion with the witchcraft parts, I will say even at times I'm ashamed of wearing my headdress and everything because of that. This is Puma again. Also the church calling it witchcraft. This is Kukbiran. Shaming reawakens our trauma from all angles. Its presence is a constant battle. It's stepping back into places as born healer students and earths and teachings. It prevents us from doing that each time that someone looks at us and belittles our way of life, our way of teachings, and how we understand the land. When we come here and we listen to the scientists and they're talking about the studies of all these countries, we live it. There is no one who knows those plants better than us. And when we have that close relationship, it's that oneness, that spiritual oneness that we have. That's the magic we carry.
So the in addition to the history of colonialism, which has impacted on Indigenous peoples and their plants and their culture, we are now seeing the impacts of environmental change and climate change. And both Canada and South Africa in these two settings have witnessed severe fires and floods. For example, in April 22, there were days of heavy rain across KwaZulu Natal, which left at least 435 people that had died across the province.
The crucial role of the Indigenous language, and I'm just going to cut it short here, is that our teachings are oral teachings, and just in the most recent, our language has been written. And so with that, it's changed a little bit, but yeah, it's not enough time to explain all this, but it's important.
So going on, just talking a little bit about the visibility of Indigenous medicines. This is something that in the dialogues held between the Indigenous practitioners, that it was noticed that there was large differences. So it is estimated that there are as many as 200,000 traditional healers in South Africa, compared to 25,000 doctors trained in biomedical medicine. So traditional healers are consulted by approximately 60% of the South African population. And that is very, very different to the situation in Canada. So just to talk very briefly about the screens to nature method that we used. The screens to nature technology, as quoted by Gebex, detects bioactive compounds from plants and other natural sources by low-cost, innovative, simple yet effective field deployable assays. And this is a simple and expedient way to give students the tools to detect bioactive health-protecting properties in local Indigenous plant materials. And we are using these STN approaches with Secwepemc elders and students together with knowledge keepers, but there's much more work to do. So moving forward, we will continue these dialogues. In August this year, another visit from Indigenous healers and scholars from Canada will come to South Africa. We're going to continue collaborations using screens to nature as practical tools and sharing and exploring concerns of availability of Indigenous herbs in context of ecological destruction. And essentially what we're aiming at is exploring the reclamation of Indigenous plants, herbs, knowledges, and systems. And thank you for your attention.